Allison's overriding mission is to improve the way the world works. The Vehicle Environmental Test Center will allow Allison and its partners to complete year-round testing.
Our customers and partners will be able to replicate extreme environments to solidify dependable, reliable, repeatable, and secure results, all in one centralized location.
Validate, develop, and bring new products to market faster.
Their data is confidential, all of the information that they have. We have a cloud-based platform which further accelerates product development and get products to market more quickly.
We're not relying on Mother Nature to deliver the right conditions for testing.
Hot soak and cold soak chambers, plus 125 Fahrenheit to a minus 54 Fahrenheit. Altitude testing down to sea level, up to 5,000 meters or 18,000 feet. Full road load simulation with 2 chassis dynamometer test cells inside the facility, a heavy duty and a medium duty. We have electrification capabilities up to 500 kilowatt at 600 volts of DC power.
We can test electric vehicles, hybrids, emissions testing, performance, onboard diagnostics. Any variety of test options are limitless.
A seasonally independent, repeatable, reliable test facility that lets us compress the product development time frame.
It's like nothing you've ever seen.
A remarkable achievement.
Extreme conditions.
Repeatable.
Reliable.
One of a kind,
Secure.
open for business.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Tom Kelly. I'm the Executive Director and CEO of Automation Alley. We are Michigan's Industry 4.0 Knowledge Center. Today's topic is Industry 4.0, manufacturing change. And for those of you in this room who don't know what that term means, I'm sure everybody does, but it stands for the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And we think we're in a period of rapid change when it comes to manufacturing. So if you think about the Second Industrial Revolution, which Michigan invented, Henry Ford created the assembly line, and then Thomas Edison, before that, created electricity and the light bulb, and all of those things came together to power factories and change the way work was done. Well, today we're in what we think is the fourth industrial revolution, which is the digitization of everything. So if you think of artificial intelligence, or 3D printing, or collaborative robotics, or new materials, or the industrial Internet of Things, or digital twins, virtual reality, augmented reality. I could go on. All of these technologies in their own right are very disruptive and require a strategic mindset to understand how to navigate. With Industry 4.0, all of these technologies are occurring at once. By the way, that's on the factory floor at the same time that we're wrestling with electrification, mobility, autonomy, mobility as a service. So the industry is undergoing massive amounts of change. And so we're here to try and make sense of what's happening on the factory floor in this revolution at the same time that we're looking outside with some of these other revolutions, I guess, that we're talking about. So I'm joined by an expert panel today. With me is Wendy Bauer. She's the Global Director of Automotive Sales at Amazon Web Services. And Wendy's going to introduce herself in just a moment. I have David Johnson, who's the Vice President of Production Engineering and New Model Quality at Nissan North America. I have Peter Marcotullio. He's the Vice President of Global Partnerships for SRI International. And joining us via Zoom is Dr. Irene Petrick, Senior Director of Industrial Innovation at Intel. So with that, Wendy, let's start with you. Could you give us a brief introduction about yourself and how you got into this Industry 4.0 world, and then we'll go down the line from there.
Sure, happy to. Thanks, Tom. As Tom mentioned, my name is Wendy Bauer. I lead the Global Automotive Sales Organization for Amazon Web Services, or AWS. For those of you not familiar, AWS is the cloud computing division of Amazon. Cloud computing, quick terminology in case you're not super familiar with it, it references the on-demand delivery of IT resources and capabilities via the internet with pay-as-you-go pricing. But it gives us the flexibility for companies to avoid having to purchase and maintain data centers, servers, et cetera, and utilize their resources elsewhere. So why am I passionate about this topic? It's pretty simple, and I love the impact and the opportunity that we see in the industry. But it goes back to the fact that I have spent my entire career directly in and supporting now the automotive industry. And for the first 22 years, I had the opportunity to work at a global OEM in product development and quality and warranty and procurement roles. And then I had the opportunity to work in 3 major leading tier 1 auto parts suppliers, largely in global sales, leadership roles, and business development. And like every single one of you sitting here today in the room and online, I'm sure you've had the opportunity to live many days, many experiences of the challenges and complexities that we all face in the industry. For example, I had many experiences of natural disasters or unexpected events that shut down supply chains, where I spent around-the-clock time with the manufacturing plants to really understand if we were going to be impacting our customers, or spent many days with late production releases now impacting manufacturing and supply and having to answer to my customer where things were. Or, as we all know, annual and long-term releases from our automotive customers, when you got to the month and the week and the day and sometimes the hours, those EDIs changed very regularly, and then you're left with explaining to your CEO why your revenues changed. In all of those events, there was one common thread. It just really seemed harder than it needed to be over and over again. And so I really started studying why is the data so disparate? Why is it completely siloed across the organization? Can't this really be easier? And then we started hearing about these terms, big data, Industry 4.0, and I was super intrigued. So 5 years ago, I made the jump to the technology world. And with those learnings, I landed in the role that I have now at AWS. And now I have the opportunity to lead and work alongside all of the global automotive companies on the planet and major tier 1 parts suppliers to really help them think about what is possible and to bring those visions into reality across their organization and their entire enterprise. Starting from product development engineering to manufacturing and supply chain transformation, all the way through their product and into the vehicle with new digital services. But again, so the passion and the opportunity of what can be done, and that the fact that it is real, is my motivation.
Thank you, Wendy. Excellent. David, do you want to give us an introduction and a little bit about yourself and where you're from and what you do and all that good stuff?
Yep. Thanks, Tom. As Tom said, I'm David Johnson, Vice President of Production Engineering and New Model Quality at Nissan North America. Now, whenever you look at that title, it's a bit of a mouthful, I know, and it has nothing to do with technology. However, as I rewind back and tell you a little bit about how I got involved in Industry 4.0, it really goes back to mid last decade, 2015, while I was in NMUK, and Industry 4.0 was really becoming a buzzword. It was rushing to the front of everyone's mind. So I was able to sort of start laying the groundwork of the vision at the Sunderland plant, and whenever I came back to the US in 2017, we were ramping up our US and Mexico strategies. And so we were sitting there saying, okay, where is this overall strategy? Where's it going to be housed? Is it going to be in the IT department? Is it going to be in the plants individually? And I'm sitting there and saying, well, I'm getting ready to embark on a journey of 10 new products in the US market in 20 months. And anytime that we introduce new models into the plants, there's a tremendous amount of change that comes, new equipment, a great opportunity to accelerate Industry 4.0 and all of the concepts. So I raised my hand and said, I'll take it, which was really great. Got the opportunity to assemble a team that we call a digital acceleration team. I know it's a novel name, but you know that's what we do. We try to accelerate the adoption of digital practices and digital technology in everything that we do. And really that whole team started with a vision. Let's use the technology that's available through Industry 4.0, which is moving at lightning speed to solve real problems for real people on the shop floor. The goal of my organization is to make the frontline workers' jobs better, make the engineers more efficient, make the whole organization more efficient so that we can deliver better product to the customers at the end of the day. And it's great because I get to come into work every day and just say, who is going to do something fantastic? Who's going to do something great today, and leveraging new technology that they can say, I made that person's life better through the adoption of one of the Industry 4.0 technologies, whether it's a Cobot, a bot for doing some back office task that makes it just more efficient, whether it's assigning new design changes out to everybody that needs to get it and doing that automatically versus someone actually sending the email. It's been a really exciting journey up to this point, and it's going to be more exciting as the new technology continues to come out and we continue to apply it. But I look forward to sharing with the audience today, and really look forward to your questions more than anything so that we can have a good, lively discussion.
Thank you, David, and that's a great little side segue before we get to Peter. If any of you have any questions, please use the app to ask us these questions here. I'll see it come up here. I'll be delighted to ask our participants these questions. So if you're thinking of one, start adding them early. I know it's going to be so full we may not get to your question. So if you think of it, please get them in early. Peter, so you're with SRI International, and you actually have a couple slides for us, because SRI, a lot of people in this audience won't know who SRI is and what you do and how it relates to Industry 4.0. So why don't you walk us through it?
Exactly, and actually that was my opening line. How many people know who SRI is, right? Because it's very few. Okay, a few in the audience and probably a few online. And I just want to sort of give you an overview of who we are and what we do to share kind of our role and our perspective, because we're all about technology, and that's not always the best place to be when you're talking about introducing things into a manufacturing environment. But it does give you a sense of, or I hope to give you a sense of, sort of how we think about the future of technology and how it might impact Industry 4.0. So for those of you who don't know what SRI is, you may have heard of something called Stanford Research Institute. And we were created by Stanford 75 years ago with the sole mission of kind of moving technology out of the lab into the real world so it can have an impact on society. And so we are kind of a weird creature. We are an independent, mission-driven, nonprofit research institute. And all of those words sort of mean something important. So we're not a national lab, we're not an academic lab, we're not an industry captive lab. We're truly independent. We work with lots and lots of different organizations, and my focus is working primarily with sort of industry folks. We work across several areas, biotech, but most important for Industry 4.0, large research groups in information and computing technologies. In fact, one of the first AI labs in the world, and advanced systems like sensors, radars, LiDARs, robotics, large sort of complex scientific systems. For those of you that don't know SRI, you probably touch a dozen or so SRI technologies every day. So things that were developed at SRI, but because we're a nonprofit, they never have our name on them. They're distributed because we've worked with others or started companies. So if you've ever used a computer mouse or ever sent a message on the internet or used an LCD, or as many of us have used recently, a virtual private network, you're all touching technologies that originated at SRI, and then were transitioned through industry or startups or other means to other folks to sort of bring to market and commercialize. So they were all pioneered at SRI and then transitioned. And if you've been in your car lately, you've probably used Apple CarPlay with Siri. Well, Siri was developed at SRI and then eventually transitioned to a startup and then sold to Apple several years later. And then, of course, the most important thing we've ever developed is the first down marker on the football field, which we did for ESPN. So that's a little bit of our background. Our business model, again, is also kind of unique. We do a lot of basic research for the federal government. Many agencies you've probably heard of, like DARPA and NASA, National Institutes of Health. Then we work with industry to look at applying those technologies, and then we look through a variety of pathways to transition those, typically through either startups or licensing. So again, Siri, Nuance, which was recently acquired by Microsoft, came out of SRI. If you've ever had robotic surgery, Intuitive Surgical came out of SRI, many other different kinds of companies. And in terms of scale, there's about 1,000 projects that we do for basic research. There's about 100 that we do in applied research, and about 10 come out and actually get commercialized. So you can see that there's a lot of research before it ever makes it to market. And in terms of automotive, it's not a huge sector for us, but it is an area that we spend a lot of time in, and we've especially recently done work in a variety of areas, including some that impact Industry 4.0. So if you've seen the Toyota commercial recently with the UE vehicle in Japan interacting with the passengers, that was work we did with Toyota. We've done work in Industry 4.0 in sort of productivity, understanding how people are interacting with machines in the factory. And then if you were sort of sharp-eared yesterday at the keynote and maybe sharp-eyed, the image on the lower left is a bin picking for a door lock. So I'll let you make the connection to that shout out yesterday. So that's kind of an overview of SRI and where we fit, and hopefully we'll get a chance to discuss what we think are some of the technologies that are going to impact Industry 4.0 in the next few years.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. So now you know SRI. You didn't realize just how impactful Stanford Research has been over the years, and it's really been a fantastic organization. So last but not least, we come to Dr. Irene Petrick, and Irene is a good friend of mine. Irene has done so much. She was instrumental in shaping how I think about Industry 4.0 for our companies in the state of Michigan. She's a wealth of knowledge. She's always calling me with new information. Hey, we're doing this study at Intel, and boy, you know, and it keeps me connected with the digital community. And I'm so pleased that she's joining us today. So Irene, can you introduce yourself? And I know you have some slides of some interesting work that you've just done.
I do. Thank you. Thank you, Tom. And thank you for those kind words. Hopefully I can live up to the expectation that you've set for me. So I've been at Intel for about 6.5 years now. Before this, I was a professor at Penn State and also did a lot of consulting in industry with automotive, with the military, with pharmaceuticals, and with biotech and aerospace. So a lot of my remarks today are going to come from a couple of places. They're going to come from my experience, but they're also going to come from a study that my colleague Faith McCrary and I have been doing over the last 4 years. So for the last 4 years, we've talked with and surveyed over 500 people from over 400 companies. And what we're trying to do is to try and understand what was happening in the industry, beginning in 2018, actually, and then think about what was digital transformation, and now with COVID that we're living through, what does the next normal look like? And so I promised Tom that I would try and put a couple of slides together, and I only have 4. So if you bear with me, if you'd go to the next slide, please. So this is work that we've been doing from our Manufacturing 100. These are 100 companies that we're following over 3 different surveys, actually. But so we asked people, you know, what's the COVID impact today? And 71% of people that we're talking to, and this is in the industrial space, so it's not only automotive, but it is only industrial. So it doesn't include healthcare, it doesn't include retail, for example. 71% said, hey, COVID has caused or amplified many of my biggest challenges. And we asked people, well, what are you doing about it? What kind of mitigations are in place? 63% said, well, we're still very concerned about protections for our workers, so worker safety. 61% said, well, now that we've got people off the factory floor, how can we make remote work more successful? And that's really interesting because back in 2019, almost no companies told us they wanted to do remote work. And so you can see a huge change there. And then 49%, almost half of the survey respondents told us agility and resilience are critical. So if you go to the next slide, please. We asked people where the factory is heading and what do they expect. Well, in 2019, AI was very much an exploratory kind of thing. In 2020, not surprisingly, it was all about tactics, just to keep the doors open. What we're seeing now in 2021, and we expect it to continue, is a change toward longer term value. So if I'm doing AI or other kinds of digital technologies, I'm really looking for not just the value of today, I'm looking for what it brings me. Not surprising, automation is still a major piece of what companies are trying to achieve. But now they're looking at it from a resilience perspective. How quickly can I pivot? How do I know when I need to pivot? And then the other one that's getting worse because of COVID, we knew we had a labor shortage. We knew we had a skills gap. That's just gotten worse and worse with COVID as we've seen more people leave manufacturing. And then this last one, visibility and context, and I'm sure we'll talk about this as part of our discussion, but when you take people out of the factory, how do you give them that sense of knowing what's going on with what you're doing? So remote work is an important piece of that. It means we need to think differently about the data we collect and how we display it. If you go to the next slide, please. So what will the future bring? This is where it starts getting interesting. 74%, nearly 3/4 of the people we've talked with across industry, across manufacturers, expect their manufacturing sector to emerge stronger. And that compares to 20% when we surveyed this exact same group in 2020. And you can see they're increasing investments around resilience, increasing safety. They're expecting to see uncertainty continue around manufacturing. They're expecting to see an increased acceptance of remote work, and then a greater dependence on digital technologies in general. And then for my final slide, please. So where are companies on their journey toward that next normal? Well, the interesting piece is 28% say, hey, we're actively formulating a vision and we're planning. 22% say we're driving execution around some of these kinds of initiatives. 19% say they're experimenting and trying to figure it out. Unfortunately, 31% aren't doing much at all different. And those 31% are really at risk of being left behind. And I'll leave you with a positive note, though. 82% of the people we've talked with in this last year and a half has said they are confident and expect not just to survive, but to thrive in the next normal. And that's partly because of the investments they're making now and a lot of the work they're doing around digital transformation. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Irene. So I find it fascinating that 31% aren't doing anything, but 82% expect to thrive. So don't do business with that Gap company, right? Because you're not getting your product. Anyway, so let's turn back to Wendy here. And I'd like to start these questions, and I think this is appropriate actually for all of you because you all come at Industry 4.0 from such a different place. And I think the first question should be, where do you see Industry 4.0 going over the next 5 years? So pretend you're the CEO and you can allocate capital any way you want, and you're going to allocate capital to Industry 4.0. What do you spend it on? What is the thing that you think, boy, in this next 5 years, if you got to focus on this, if you know anything about anything? So what would you say, Wendy? Where do you think the world is going?
It's a loaded question. So first, where are we? I think it's hard to speculate where we really are. I think there's, no matter what analyst report you look at or what number, low to mid single digits in terms of if you assess it based on, from a cloud spend perspective, that is one indicator of, is the industry moving down this transformation journey, right? So from where I sit, we view that as very, very early on in the journey, but also it's real and customers are doing it. So how do you judge those? Where I see a lot of the variation really boils down to that particular customer. What is their business model? What drives their pain points? What drives their opportunity? What drives their innovation? How do they continue to innovate? And who are they selling to? Is it B2B? Is it B2C? Those are all variables that are real, that drive the answer to where should they put their money. So I don't think there's one answer for everyone, but really you have to understand, what am I trying to innovate? How am I going to connect better to my customer? How am I going to create closed loop of the data and the insights and predict what I have to figure out to improve my cost structure and drive the innovation?
Awesome. So David, you're actually allocating capital in a plant. So without disclosing Nissan secrets, what are you investing in? What do you spend money on?
All right, so
where do you having success?
I will. I'll state that Industry 4.0 and the statistics that Irene showed are really interesting, because it sort of aligns where I think we are as an industry, looking at the OEM side from Industry 4.0 viewpoint. I think everybody recognizes it's absolutely necessity for future competitiveness. However, what that competitiveness looks like, what is it that we've got to do, we're slowly transitioning from that exploratory phase to really creating concretely what we're going to do in the future. And, you know, for Nissan specifically, our big wins coming from early days of Industry 4.0 have been predictive maintenance. It's an absolutely fantastic thing when you can come into the workplace every day and pieces of equipment will tell you, I'm not feeling well today, and if you don't take care of me, I'm going to cause you a problem. So you can go and change that motor on the robot or the end of arm tooling, whatever it is, and make sure that you keep good uptime in the shop. So that sort of got our feet wet in predictive analytics. Where I see us going in the next 5 years is deeper into predictive quality. Predictive maintenance is, well, it seems easy now. 4 years ago, it didn't seem so easy, but you got 6 to 10 variables that you're dealing with. Start looking at predictive quality on a complex machine like an automobile that has somewhere around 30,000 parts on average across all of the OEMs. That coming together to be able to predict outcomes in subsequent processes in the plant, and then predict customer experience based on the factor control in the plant, coupled with customer data that's coming back, whether it's through streaming from connected car services, or it's different, more, we'll call it subjective data through customer surveys and those types of feedback. But I really see OEMs moving to a more really predictive quality modeling system, which I think we have all the tools to do it, quite honestly, but it's a very complex problem to solve.
Real quick, we had a question from the audience for you before we move on to Peter. But so David, the question was, how do you account for I-4O expenditures? Do you account for them in CapEx? Is it an R&D expense? Does it go? I mean, it's a pretty down there, but I figure let's hit that one out and move on to the next one. How do you account for it?
It's really a fundamental question, and it depends on the type of project that we're executing. We've kind of moved beyond proof of concepts into more actionable items that are going to drive true ROI back into the business. Early days, proof of concepts, that was mainly done through expense budgets. Now that we're moving to hard and fast assets being deployed in the plant, those go into capital planning. And the capital planning goes through the process just like any other projects do. We got to be able to show the appropriate ROI, and of course it's competing with all of the other projects in the plant at the same time. So that's one of the big things that I see that's different today versus 4 years ago. As you start out on the Industry 4.0 journey, everybody's wanting to do something, but we're also wanting to know what value is it going to bring to the business. Now that we understand the technology better, understand how it makes us more efficient in the plants, understand the problems that technology can solve for us, it's much, much easier to put that ROI to the project, state a good business case, and get the funding approved.
So real quick, Wendy, you had a comment on that, and then we'll go over to Peter.
I think it's a brilliant question, and he just kind of brought it full circle to the comment that I was going to make, is across hundreds, if not thousands of customers, we see tremendous variation here in terms of how companies traditionally source and acquire technologies, and how that's done through traditional procurement organizations and mechanisms. But now the point you made on value, We're trying to do things that these customers and companies and the industries haven't done before. I'm going to go create a solution to tie things together, collect data with hopes that I'm going to reduce quality and savings, but I haven't done it before. So how do I convince myself that I know that value to the point that I'm willing to put it on a piece of paper and willing to make the investment? So we see a lot of variation and a lot of hesitation, but it really comes down to what is that value and how is your organization going to go through a process to build confidence in value potential, show it, prove it, POCs, right? Lots of tactics that companies take, but that's a really complex part of the equation of what really limits whether companies are accelerating or not right now.
Okay, so Peter, during your presentation, you said 1,000 R&D projects leads to 100 applied research projects, leads to 10 licensable things, all the things we talked about. So you probably have a pretty good look in as to what are you working on related to I4O. You know, you are putting your money where your mouth is on long-term payoffs. So where are you putting your next dollar?
Well, so let me start by saying it's a marathon, not a sprint, right? Okay. And so we've seen a lot of little sprint efforts. You know, that's the sort of proof of concept stage before it's being operationalized. And not only is it a marathon, it's probably a triathlon, right? So there's a lot of different disciplines. So everything you mentioned at the beginning, whether it's AR, VR, you know, generative design, or IoT or 5G. I mean, these are all areas that have an impact on, potentially have an impact on Industry 4.0. You know, from our perspective, what the areas that we're focusing on are really sort of gaps that we see in how the technology is evaluated and deployed. In fact, to answer part of the previous question, we've seen investments be capitalized. We've seen them be part of an operating budget because it makes sense that they're there. We've even seen them be accrued against like warranty costs if you're seeing savings in quality, right? And long-term performance of a product. So I think, you know, there's lots of different ways you can think about it. In terms of specific technologies, the most common thread today, and this answer would be different last year and will probably be different next year, is probably around AI and specifically the sort of use of data around for all these systems. So whether you're talking about a robot or a supply chain management activity or predictive maintenance, they all have today all have an element of AI. And there's just a lot of research going into how, you know, what's the statistic I saw recently? 80+% of AI projects never make it to operationalization, right? Probably an exception at AWS, but for most of the world. And so what can we do to make AI a tool that's actually deployed in a much more easy to use fashion, right?
I think it was it Sundar Pichai that said AI will be more impactful than fire on humanity. He's preaching his book, but that's a profound statement to put yourself behind, right? Incredible. So let's come to Dr. Petrick. Same question with a twist, Irene. So we talked about where do you see the world going in I4O over the next 5 years? Where would you put $1? You're advising management within Intel on how they should be thinking about these investments. And I bet culture has a lot to do with it in terms of what they should be picking and why they should be picking what they're picking. Can you talk a little bit to us about how important that facet of Industry 4.0 is to anybody who's listening and watching?
Sure, Tom. I think that when we talk about where should you be putting dollars, one of the places that companies haven't put enough dollars over the last decade that they're finding is a real barrier to moving forward is around infrastructure. So do I have the right pipes? In other words, to actually transmit data? Have I thought about where compute should happen? Have I thought about where storage should happen? Have I really thought about edge to cloud kind of issues? So it turns out that one of the reasons many of these projects, as one of my colleagues just mentioned, turns out that one of the reasons many of these projects don't get to scale is because of all of the other expenses that needed to go into creating the infrastructure needed for that project to be successful. So a lot of times these projects tend to look like black holes, where you just pour more and more money into, and it's generally not the project itself, but it's generally the infrastructure in which the project sits. So Intel, we spend a lot of time thinking about how to make some of those decisions easier for companies. And unfortunately, and I'm sure you'll hear this in other answers throughout the next half hour or so, these technologies are really not standalone. So you can't just drop a box of Legos on someone's desk and say, there it is. You really have to put together and seamlessly stitch these technologies together. And unfortunately, you ask what's Intel doing? Unfortunately, most vendors aren't used to working this closely together before a sale happens to even put together what a solution might look like. And so there's an awful lot of work that has to happen in the ecosystem, which is where we play, obviously, that brings these kinds of technologies together into deployable solutions. And that's something that I think we probably, as an industry, tech industry, haven't spent as much time on as we need to. So that's where we're spending a lot of our effort.
Well, Irene, I would argue it's not even the tech industry, that it's also in automotive, because Automation Alley is a World Economic Forum advanced manufacturing hub, and it gives us access to a lot of data. We do a lot of work with them, and one of the things they talk about that you hear is pilot purgatory, where they'll say, look, all the big companies, they have I4O projects all over the world, but they're all siloed because of fiefdoms that say, it's working for me, and this guy says, over my dead body, are you gonna put this in over here? You can kiss my, and anyway, that goes on and on. And so how do you get your head around, and this, I'll open this up to all you guys, how do we get our head around driving that change that says, it ain't about you anymore, buddy. If, you gotta play with everybody now, and how do we drive by wire from wherever we are to everywhere else that exists? How do we get there? Because at the end of the day, humans tend to be ownership people. It's just human nature. We tend to want to control what we can control. How do we give up that control and be successful?
No,
you are chopping at the bit.
Yeah,
so
it was something that Irene said, but it's in addition to the infrastructure, one of the things that we're seeing that's challenging is even things like who owns the data, who gets to analyze the data, who gets to report the data, and who gets to aggregate the data. All of those are roadblocks that and those are internal, those are with vendors. I've seen machine equipment companies with IoT and maintenance built into their equipment not share that data with the customer who just bought that equipment, right? And so there's a lot of things we have to resolve before we can, get to the point where it's something you can deploy readily. I'm sure you're probably seeing a lot of that in your business. Like, who owns the data? Where is it? How do you access it?
Yeah, a couple points I would stress, and I love what she said around it's not about a bunch of Lego blocks. How do you bring this together? And it's not just bringing it together typically inside of one company or with one partner company. The real value unlocking and potential that exists across the industry, this is ecosystem-wide, right? When you think of the topic of supply chain and the tier N that exists within the automotive industry, and how does the industry together really solve that issue? The issues of complexity and technology, of course, plays a big component in that, but data ownership gets smack in the middle of that conversation every time it starts. So how do you really work together across the ecosystem and with partners? Because the truth is no company can do it alone. So how do you bridge culture, skills, capabilities, all of that to really drive the outcomes?
Excellent. So David, I have a question for you, and it'll dovetail, so you can answer what Wendy and Peter are talking about, but how do you get your people in the plant to embrace all this change and all this new way of doing things? You know, every time you bring in I4O, it tends to be enough different that it's uncomfortable at first. And so how do you get them to be a part of the solution and feel like they're champions and owners along with you?
Well, I've got a saying that I love, and it's nobody likes change except for the baby with a wet diaper. So you've got to be able to convince.
Where's that rim shot?
So it's after lunch. It's late in the afternoon. I know it's the last session, so trying to get you get a little lively in here. So for me, it starts with the vision that comes from the top. What is it that we want to get out of Industry 4.0? And it's pretty simple at Nissan. We want to be able to find real problems on the shop floor and impact real people's lives in a positive way so that we can drive better work-life balance, better efficiency, and ultimately better products for the customer. So everybody understands that vision, everybody buys into that vision, and then we sort of flip it around. So that's sort of the top-down direction. Then the problems and the solutions come from the ground up. And that's where it gets really tricky, because then there's prioritization of what gets funded, what doesn't get funded. You want to get stuck in pilot purgatory. You want to be able to say, okay, this is the ecosystem that we're building. What are the appropriate building blocks so that we don't have standalone technologies? Because if there's a word that I absolutely hate, it's standalone technologies. Everything has got to be connected into the ecosystem to drive that ultimate goal of being able to positively impact our work lives and our product quality. So at the end of the day, you empower the people. You empower the people to solve the problems. Let them do as subject matter experts on the systems that we have, whether it's a legacy system or a new system that we're tying into a legacy system. Let them do what they know how to do best and support them through that process. And specifically where we have legacy systems and new systems coming in, I really like to get some of the industry veterans, you know, that have 20, 25 years experience with these systems and know how they work deeply, to work with some of the newcomers that know the new technology, tie those two together. And at the end of the day, you get two-way learning going on. You got the newcomers who is learning actually how the business operates, how the processes come together to make a car, to drive quality, to drive efficiency. And then you've got the industry veteran that's been there for 20 to 25 years learning great things about new technology that gets their wheels spinning so that they can find more opportunities to deploy solutions.
Yeah, I'll get you, Peter. Real quick, David, are you using digital twin technology on your preventative maintenance process, or are you using other strategies for that?
Other strategies. We're dipping our toes into digital twin technology right now, but in another area of the business.
That was one of our audience questions. Are you using digital twin? Peter, you had a comment on that.
Yeah, well, actually on both. One area, earlier you asked about new technology areas. So in a world where you may have data that you don't want to share, one of the things we're looking at is how do you encrypt data, put it in the cloud, and query that data without decrypting it, so that you can share it, but you can feel safe, your data is protected. Yeah. But building on what David said, we really interesting program that we had a few years ago was looking at human behavior modeling on the factory floor, right? So this isn't just activity monitoring, it's context, it's behavior monitoring within that person's role on a factory floor. And frankly, the intent of the customer, which was a tier 1 supplier, was to be able to capture as much of that data as possible and then replace it with automation. And what we found was that in a significant portion of the tasks, we could not replace it with automation. In other words, those activities were so complex, flexible, and ill-defined in the manufacturing process, even with all the process documentation, that it was very hard to automate. And so we ended up finding that the workers who were being monitored were not happy about that monitoring process until they realized that it actually was able to quantify the value of their task in a way that they couldn't before. And then they started asking for it, because it also highlighted where problems were caused by something else, not their problem on the assembly line. And then we eventually spun that out into a company called Drishti, and some of you have worked with Drishti here.
Sure.
And that's part of what they're doing. But that was a real learning for us. as to the importance of how these systems work within the, coming from a Silicon Valley sort of idealized world, you don't realize how complex, messy, dynamic the world of manufacturing is.
So Irene, you've done great work in this field, and you only had time to really talk at really high level about what some of your research, current research is telling you. But I'd like to ask you, okay, you can look back and pull from anything you've uncovered at Intel over the years. What's something that really stands out to you that you think, that changed my thinking a little bit when I found this out? What do you think for our audience? What should they be thinking about?
I think, to me, it all starts with people. Yep. So we tend to talk about Industry 4.0 from a technology perspective, myself included, but it really all starts with people. And it starts with not only their willingness to change, but their ability to understand where change makes sense. And we found in our 2018 work, for example, we found that the people on the factory floor are hungry for technologies that make their jobs easier. We found that they're hungry for more transparency. They want to play a more strategic role. They want to know how what they're doing actually impacts somebody else's job further down the line. And so there's a lot of interest on the factory floor for these kinds of technologies, but somebody earlier mentioned the need for engagement. We've got to find ways to get groups working together. We've got to find ways to build critical mass. One of the things that has surprised me personally in some of the work I've been doing is what we call the unexpected developer. So when we look at skill sets out there between manufacturers from the factory floor to the C-suite and in technology companies that support them, so ecosystem companies that support them, what we're finding is that the number of people who have both manufacturing expertise and digital chops, if you will, that's only about 20% of the population who are actually working in these jobs. And so there's I love the idea of pairing newcomers with old timers, so to speak, to do some of this skilling, this skill sharing. But we're asking people to develop technologies that they don't really have the deep expertise and background to understand or anticipate problems with. And where that really plays out is around cybersecurity. When we ask people, what are you doing and what are you responsible for? Only 20% of the people who are responsible for cybersecurity believe they have the deep expertise needed to do it. That should be a very sobering statistic.
That is a very sobering statistic. I'm going to check my systems when I get back home and see who's in charge of them. We outsource everything, so hopefully we're in better shape. But so let me ask you guys a question. So I was interviewing the provost at Lawrence Tech University, Dr. Petrick, and he said, Tom, Industry 4.0 is going to eliminate manual labor entirely. It's a very thought-provoking question. I'm not going to go all the way there, but I want you guys to talk about the skills that are going to be required going forward, the skills that will change, the jobs that will change. I mean, how do we look at it, not from a technology perspective, but from a human interest perspective? These people that are working in the factory, what skills are they going to need to have going forward? And you can add, if you'd like, do you think manual labor is going away? But I'd love to hear what you think. Let's start with Wendy, actually. Please, Wendy, I'd love your take on this.
I'm going to pick up on a point that Irene mentioned around the combination of digital skills and deep industry experience. One of the things that, and I'll come back to your question here, but one of the things that we see very critically from our point of view on technology is we recognize fully we can't anticipate or begin to anticipate really the deep technology needs that are really going to drive the technology and unlock the capability to the degree that we know is possible based on what we know. And so we are being very intentional on many fronts of bringing in industry domain experience capabilities and taking initiatives around training and enabling customers and working side by side in co-innovation type environments to get that knowledge. So fast forward to, back to your question, that takes a long time. You don't develop 30 years of knowledge that someone has gained overnight and think you can just walk into the factory floor and replace that. So is it going to be 10 years, 15 years, 20 years? I couldn't even begin to predict, but we understand the complexity of that synergy that she talked about and how critical that is. So will it change work? For sure. Can technology replace work completely? I don't think so.
So who wants to piggyback on that? Anybody have any comments on that? Otherwise, we're going.
Yeah, I'll go. So from a skill set viewpoint and how it's changing work, I've got a foot in two worlds. So I've got the engineering side and I've got the manufacturing side out on the shop floor. So on the engineering side itself, if I look back 15 years ago, I would have never put out a job opportunity for a data scientist or a software engineer in the roles that are within my my job scope. But today, that's a reality. I need data scientists, I need software engineers as much as I need mechanical and electrical engineers. So that's changing the dynamics of automotive engineering and how we can actually capitalize on all of the data that we're generating. And then whenever you look at the shop floor, I talked about predictive maintenance. Well, the predictive maintenance that we've been able to do saves multiple maintenance people's time. And people say, well, did those jobs go away? No, those jobs did not go away. Those folks are still there. They're just a lot more efficient in what they do. They get the opportunity to go out and explore other areas, to deploy new technologies, to make the overall operation run much more efficiently. And then in areas where we put in cobots that are working right alongside our people online. Well, the people are still there online doing what they've always done. Now they get an opportunity to program a cobot. They get an opportunity to learn a new skill, to do something that's right there on the cutting edge of innovation and working alongside with this machine without light curtains and fences. And not only work along beside it, but actually tell it what it needs to do based on the skills that they had, maybe doing that ergonomically challenging job before.
Are they excited by that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Wouldn't you be?
Yeah. Well, one of the questions we got was they said, look, how do you get these people who are technically challenged sometimes, they're making a generalization, says, look, there's a lot of people that had trouble just getting onto Zoom and things, and you're asking them to do jobs that are becoming much more sophisticated. I think what I'm hearing from you is they're willing and able to learn if you get them excited, if you give them a reason to be passionate, that they have some sense of control.
No shortage of hand raisers. No shortage of hand raisers to learn new technology. Some people are put a little bit aback by it, but there's plenty of folks out there that really want to learn the new technology, want to see it drive their jobs forward as well as the companies that they work for.
Peter, you see it that way?
Absolutely. In fact, the case study I mentioned earlier about the productivity echoes what Irene was mentioning about people really wanting to understand what was happening, have transparency, how their task was affecting tasks downstream directly, and then how to improve things, right? The other thing that we're seeing is, obviously new cohorts of more digital native people entering the workforce, and new areas of work where we're actually creating sort of cobots for AI. In other words, these are AI systems that are dependent on the interaction with an expert, whether that's a maintenance expert or an assembly expert, in order for the AI to continue to do its job. So, we're sort of working the best features of both in order to optimize what we're trying to solve for that problem.
Irene, anything to add on that as you're hearing us talk about this issue?
From a skills perspective, I think that one of the digital skills are going to be preeminent. but they're going to be digital skills combined with some kind of application. And so in manufacturing, I think that we're really looking for people who are curious. We're looking for people who are interested and who are problem solvers in their own right. And if you give them the tools, I agree with my colleagues, they will use them and they'll use them very effectively, we've found. One of the things that I think is really interesting in all of this, though, is we tend to eliminate or assume that AI is going to change the way that work happens and get rid of people. I think AI is going to change the way that work happens. I don't think it's going to get rid of people, but it's going to require people who are much more statistically oriented, who can think about probabilities, who can think about simulations. So I think it's going to require some upskilling to take advantage of it. But I don't think it's a 20-year journey. I think COVID is certainly accelerating digital uptake. And once you start, it tends to become a self-fulfilling prophecy in terms of digitization.
So we might have time for the last question, and I want to ask it this way. So one of the frustrations of being in the auto industry, pick an OEM, we don't get credit on Wall Street for the way we think about where the world is going, right? They tend to think, an example, Tesla has a digital first mindset. They're working on the whole ecosystem, so they're worth $700 billion. And if you're GM or Ford, you're worth $70 billion or $50 billion, even though you're making 10, 12 billion in profit a year. Wall Street says, but I'm not betting on you because I don't think you have the mindset to actually survive the coming tsunami. So I'm gonna play the devil's advocate and say, none of you are gonna make it. Wall Street doesn't believe you can make it. Okay, don't kill me, I'm just the messenger. What do you say to that? Who wants to take that question? Does anybody want to challenge on that? Did I just drop the mic? It is the elephant in the room, right? Let me ask it a different way.
Well,
go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was in one of the earlier panels. You go to Fremont, and that plant is struggling, right? And so, and I said it earlier when I said, in the Silicon Valley, we live in a nice, clean, hermetic world. But when you get into the manufacturing world, there's a lot of things that are going on that are, messy and real, right? And I think that the auto industry, I'm continually amazed when we go in and work with OEMs, tier ones, tier twos, how sophisticated they are, how much they're doing, and how open they are to start thinking about implementing a lot of these advanced systems, and how good they are actually making it happen, right? Just not taking it as a concept, but maybe filtering things, but then actually delivering products that people use in a critical matter, right? I mean, if my phone dies, my phone dies. But if my car, something goes wrong with my car, that could be a life and death situation. Yeah. And people don't appreciate that level of capability that's in this industry.
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't believe that. But that's the frustration that we all have to deal with in the industry every day. So what do you think about that, David?
It's really a difficult question to answer. But for me, I think that the way, or why Wall Street thinks that way is, okay, you're big corporations, you're slow to react, slow to move. Whereas the startups, more nimble, more forward-thinking. But what I've seen from mid-part of last decade, 2014, 2015, when Industry 4.0 became the big buzzword, is the automotive industry has become extremely nimble. And there is an innovation spirit that's there, because with the change to electrification, the changing industry, that is really driving us to behave in different ways. And for that reason, and that reason alone, I think that we're going to be around for many, many decades to come.
So let me transition over to Wendy here. We're just about out of time. But Wendy, one of the things I admire about Amazon, from the start, Amazon was not a digital company. They were digital and physical. They had physical stuff they had to get out. Almost every other Silicon Valley startup was about create it and then license it to everybody in the world all at once. But Amazon had to slowly and methodically build systems to distribute physical things. Can you talk a little bit about that and just the digital mindset that's coupled with the physicality that goes on at Amazon every day?
Yeah, and I'll actually respond in a way that builds upon the last question. I think if I look across all the different industries that my colleagues have an opportunity to participate and lead and engage in, take your pick, healthcare, financial services, media and entertainment, the challenge that we're talking about here, frankly, exists in every single industry. Every single industry has the legacy type companies. Every single industry is faced with tech disruptors in their own right. I think so the disruption and the need and the fear in some cases around what does it mean for our future, I boil it down simply to the fact that technology can be leveraged, and it's really around your willingness and ability to embrace that technology and really figure out what is your company best at and just not lose sight of innovation. Now, in the auto industry, where I think the challenge has been is the trust and willingness and appetite to partner. And I think to keep that pace of innovation, the complexity that we see and the kinds of problems and challenges that the industry is going after, that's going to be imperative to being able to succeed there. But back to, your comment on Amazon, it focuses fundamentally on understanding the world's biggest, most complex problems and doing what we call working backwards from those problems and working towards understanding what is that common, undifferentiated heavy lifting that we can remove, that we spread across and allow all of the organizations and entities around the world and different industries and applications to benefit from. So that the domain experts and the industry experts, they have an opportunity to go innovate in their space.
Terrific. Well, Wendy, David, Peter, and Irene, I want to thank you for being here. I think we actually had 4 questions that we got through with the audience as well. I loved the conversation. I am full of hope after this session that we are on the right path. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I think that concludes our session today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Irene. See you.
Bye-bye.